The first whispers came from a file no one outside a gray MI5 office was ever meant to see. A file stamped in red ink, classified and locked for decades. Inside, a name that would make even seasoned intelligence officers pause: Meghan Markle. But she was not alone in the margins of this document. Alongside her, the dossier traced a path of unusual encounters, travel patterns, and one name already synonymous with royal scandal: Prince Andrew. It began quietly, like a low murmur drifting through the thick walls of London, but the implications were anything but quiet. MI5 had stumbled upon communications, photographs, and financial threads that tied the rising actress to a world the public would never imagine. The Mediterranean summer of 2013 suddenly flickered back to life, a sun-soaked season that had been carefully buried under layers of secrecy. In intercepted travel logs, encrypted correspondence, and classified bank records, the two names appeared repeatedly, in the same place at the same time. On yachts that floated like silent fortresses across the azure waves, the dossier revealed the convergence of a Hollywood actress and a prince already treading the edges of controversy. The messages themselves, recovered years later from a burner phone, were banal on the surface, almost playful. "Still smiling from Sardinia. When can we repeat a kiss?" one read. And the reply, simple yet loaded: "Soon. Duty calls in Toronto next week, but let's make it happen." The intelligence officers knew exactly what that implied. It wasn't gossip, it wasn't a passing moment, it was a carefully observed series of interactions that could, if revealed, cause shockwaves not just in Buckingham Palace, but across the global perception of the monarchy. Surveillance reports matched the metadata of photographs, timestamps, and yacht itineraries. The Gulf Stream flights, the exclusive gatherings, the Mediterranean hotspots where the elite moved invisibly, all lined up. It wasn't luck or coincidence, it was convergence. A 3-week summer that had left traces on servers, ledgers, and encrypted archives that intelligence agencies never forgot. And then there was the money. A single payment of $38,000 moved from a shell company into a corporate account linked to Meghan, days after the yacht trip. To the untrained eye, it might seem like a minor transaction, but MI5 recognized patterns: offshore routing, shell corporations, references that matched private gatherings, an invisible trail that told a story no tabloid could ever uncover. These details were carefully compartmentalized, segregated in classified files labeled with codes and red flags. They were the kind of details that, if made public, could reshape public opinion, threaten national security, and put the monarchy under scrutiny it hadn't faced since Andrew's own scandals. The summer of 2013, once considered forgotten, was now the epicenter of a potential crisis. MI5 watched, cataloged, and analyzed. Every image, every chat, every payment was a puzzle piece in a portrait no one outside the intelligence community was allowed to see. The significance of that summer was amplified because of who watched it unfold. Human sources, operatives in Monaco, encrypted messages, and bank transfers all converged to a single conclusion: there was a story of proximity, secrecy, and leverage that had been dormant for years, waiting for someone to stumble upon it. And that someone, MI5 knew, could spark a chain reaction that would rattle more than just palace walls. As MI5 continued to map the summer of 2013, a chilling realization emerged. The stakes were far higher than anyone anticipated. This wasn't just a story of two royals crossing paths in the Mediterranean. It was a map of influence, power, and opportunity, carefully tracked by intelligence agencies. The burner phone, the financial transfers, the yacht manifest, the secret photographs, they weren't isolated incidents. Together, they painted a picture of a summer bubble where high-ranking individuals moved in a world of private yachts, offshore accounts, and encrypted communications. The dossier made one thing abundantly clear. Meghan wasn't just a casual observer, she was active, present, and undeniably part of the same elite spaces that Prince Andrew frequented. And for MI5, proximity equaled potential leverage. The monarchy's concern wasn't about romance, it was about security, stability, and the possibility that these interactions could be weaponized. Every photograph, every message, every financial trace represented a point of vulnerability that foreign powers could exploit. Russia and the UAE were specifically highlighted in the report, identified as potential holders of the sensitive material. Intelligence officers understood that leaks from these channels could destabilize the crown, not through public scandal alone, but by creating diplomatic tensions, undermining trust, and shifting alliances. The financial trail reinforced the dossier's warnings. Coral Talent Holdings LLC, a shell company layered in offshore secrecy, had transferred $38,000 to an account associated with Meghan's professional entity. MI5 analysts noted the timing. The payment arrived just days after she stepped off Lady Morad. While the transfer itself seemed small in the context of global finance, it aligned perfectly with the yacht manifest, the images, and the burner phone messages. To trained eyes, it wasn't a payment for a public performance, it was a signal, a breadcrumb linking her presence directly to Andrew in a way that could be interpreted as a transactional or strategic relationship. MI5's dossier didn't speculate on motives, only on potential consequences. The analysts considered the ripple effects, public perception, the monarchy's reputation, and Harry's awareness. They recognized that if these files surfaced without preparation, it could trigger a personal and institutional crisis. Harry, already portrayed in the public eye as a protective husband navigating tensions with his family, would face a situation where the truth, or even partial truth, challenged everything he believed about Meghan's past. The intelligence team knew that public fallout would not be limited to gossip columns. It could escalate into international headlines with political ramifications. Behind closed doors, the palace began reviewing contingency plans. The recommendations were meticulous: raise security levels, monitor communications, neutralize foreign copies of files, and prepare for controlled narrative management if leaks appeared. MI5 emphasized speed. Any sign of movement toward journalists, the dark web, or foreign media had to trigger an immediate response within 6 hours. Every minute counted. The dossier concluded with a stark warning. The alleged 2013 interactions represented a dormant but serious national security risk, non-negligible, capable of undermining the monarchy if mishandled. For Meghan and Andrew, the dossier turned a brief summer encounter into a shadow that followed them years later. What the public saw as history, intelligence saw as leverage. And for MI5, it wasn't enough that the events were in the past. They had to be contained, controlled, and understood in the context of both royal stability and national security. A summer romance, long forgotten by the world, had become a dormant volcano, its potential eruption capable of shaking the foundations of Buckingham Palace. As the intelligence teams dug deeper, the patterns of that 2013 summer became impossible to ignore. Lady Morad wasn't just a yacht, it was a floating nexus where elite networks converged. Celebrities, princes, financiers, and shadowy fixers circulated freely, invisible to the world outside. For MI5, every itinerary, every flight log, every photograph represented a puzzle piece in a broader intelligence map. Meghan's presence wasn't a coincidence. It fit into a meticulously observed pattern that tied her to spaces where influence and secrecy intertwined. The burner phone, recovered years later in a Monaco raid, revealed the depth of communication between Meghan and Andrew. The WhatsApp messages were brief, intimate, and unguarded. Still smiling from Sardinia. When can we repeat a kiss? Andrew wrote. Soon. Duty calls in Toronto next week, but let's make it happen, Meghan replied. At first glance, they seemed like harmless flirtation, but MI5 analysts understood the implications. Two high-profile royals connected outside public scrutiny, in locations already flagged as sensitive. The conversation was a breadcrumb, but in intelligence terms, breadcrumbs can ignite fires. Beyond texts, the financial footprint painted a more complex picture. Offshore payments, disguised as routine or innocuous, aligned precisely with yacht schedules. Each transaction added weight to the dossier's warning. The summer wasn't merely social, it was operational, in the sense that it left traces capable of being weaponized. Analysts noted that similar patterns had appeared in cases involving foreign influence operations and high-value leverage. In short, a simple romance could become a strategic liability if exploited. The monarchy faced a delicate dilemma. Publicly acknowledging the documents would invite scandal. Ignoring them risked exposure. The palace's contingency planning was multi-layered: heightened security for Harry and Meghan, diplomatic communication with intelligence partners in Russia and the UAE, and silent monitoring of sensitive networks to prevent leaks. Every option had a calculated response time, and each response carried risks. MI5 emphasized one thing repeatedly: timing was everything. One misstep could allow a dormant risk to erupt, impacting public trust, international relations, and royal stability. Meanwhile, for Harry, the revelation was potentially devastating. He had built his life around protecting Meghan, believing her narrative was complete and transparent. Yet intelligence indicated that what he knew of her past may have been carefully curated, selectively visible, and, in some ways, incompletely understood. For a man who left a crown to protect his wife, this was more than information. It was a seismic challenge to the foundations of trust. As months turned into years, the materials remained dormant, but MI5 never relaxed. Multiple layers of oversight ensured that the information, while confidential, could be acted upon within hours. Contingency planning wasn't about gossip, it was about national security, about protecting a monarchy whose symbolic weight extended far beyond palace walls. The summer of 2013, once a private memory, became a silent vector for power, risk, and leverage. The dossier concluded with one final chilling note. Dormant, non-negligible, and persistent, the summer encounter could be activated by foreign intelligence, media leaks, or political adversaries at any time. It wasn't a threat of romance, it was a threat of exposure, capable of shaking the monarchy and its global perception. The past, carefully recorded, waited patiently, as all intelligence does, for the moment it might be needed or weaponized. By 2025, MI5's dossier on Meghan and Andrew was no longer just historical, it had become a living concern. Analysts warned that the intersection of private chats, financial transfers, and yacht sightings created a vulnerability that foreign powers could exploit. Russia's GRU networks and UAE intelligence were quietly aware of the materials, and even dormant data, if leaked strategically, could destabilize both personal reputations and the monarchy's public standing. Every image, every message, every ledger entry had the potential to be weaponized, and MI5 treated it with the seriousness it demanded. The palace, meanwhile, had to operate in total silence. Public acknowledgement would ignite scandal. Private inaction risked security breaches. MI5's contingency plans were precise. They involved monitoring all communications related to Harry and Meghan, deploying cyber defenses to neutralize foreign access, and preparing rapid response strategies to manage any leak. Each scenario was carefully timed. Any movement of sensitive material toward media or dark web endpoints would trigger a pre-written operation within 6 hours. The intelligence community had calculated the worst-case outcomes, and each was catastrophic if mishandled. Harry, isolated in Montecito, remained unaware of the full extent. He had trusted that his wife's story was transparent, her past fully known, yet intelligence indicated gaps, pieces that hadn't reached him, and a risk he had never anticipated. For a prince who had given up crowns, titles, and royal privileges to protect the woman he loved, the possibility that secrets from her pre-royal life could threaten not only her reputation, but his own safety was almost unbearable. It challenged the very foundation of the choices he had made. The financial trail added another layer of urgency. Offshore transfers from shell companies coincided with yacht voyages, private dinners, and exclusive gatherings. While on paper they seemed harmless, MI5 analysts recognized the signature of leverage. Payments that could not be traced publicly, structured to remain opaque, aligned perfectly with high-profile meetings. These weren't accidental, they were patterns, and intelligence professionals knew patterns often predict behavior. If revealed, these patterns could suggest intentional orchestration of events, potentially implicating multiple parties and amplifying the perceived scandal. Then came the final revelation. A dormant national security risk, as MI5 described it, had survived in storage across multiple secure servers. The summer of 2013, once a brief and forgotten affair, was now mapped, recorded, and understood as a convergence of risk, opportunity, and influence. The documents confirmed that Meghan and Andrew had interacted in ways that were not random, not casual, but consequential in a realm where even small events could ripple outward into geopolitics. For the palace, the stakes could not have been higher. A leak of the photos, messages, or financial evidence could shatter public trust, trigger diplomatic crises, and challenge the monarchy's narrative of transparency and propriety. For Harry and Meghan, the personal stakes were equally high. Their privacy, safety, and the perception of their marriage and public roles were suddenly vulnerable to forces beyond their control. The dossier had transformed from a secret record into a blueprint of risk, silent, patient, and potent. In the quiet corridors of MI5, officers understood one immutable truth: intelligence never sleeps. The summer of 2013 might have seemed long ago, but for those trained to see consequences, it was as urgent today as the day the events unfolded. What remained buried could rise at any moment, and when it did, the monarchy, Harry, and Meghan would face a storm crafted not by gossip, but by documented truth.